Earlier this year, CD Projekt Red's Witcher franchise has surpassed 50 million sold copies, out of which 30 million were from their most popular entry, Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. The game series has a huge worldwide fanbase, and although the last game was released in 2015, content creators still find new details in it even today. But why did this game series become so popular? Well, aside from its wide universe, great visuals, high quality and quantity content, and the overall enjoyable gameplay, a lot of its success should be actually credited to its cultural importance, especially the significance it holds for Central and Eastern Europeans. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, hi, I'm Anna, the Transylvanian villager, and I usually make videos about the literature and gaming related topics of Central and Eastern Europe because I feel like there's not enough content about it online. So if you're into that, please consider subscribing. This is episode 2 of the cultural importance of the Witcher saga duology, and last time I talked about the importance of the books, the cultural, mythological and historical references, and why Eastern and Central Europeans can relate to this series so much. And in this video, I would like to address the same topics focusing on the game series. But before we do so, I'm gonna fill your heads with more random information about the homeland of the game creators, Poland, because that's what we do on this channel. Poland is a Slavic country located in Central Europe, and if you call its people Eastern European, they will most likely get mad at you. Poland has the second oldest university in Europe, and Polish are among the most educated people in the continent, with 90% of them completing secondary school and 50% having a higher degree, which shouldn't come as a surprise because just like in every normal country, higher education in Poland is free. The Polish language is extremely difficult. I mean, even looking at their writing system makes me feel dyslexic. And the funny thing is that Polish television uses dubbing, not subtitles, and oftentimes there's a single Polish male voice speaking over all the characters.
Tato, na pomoc. To ja zawołam porucznika.
The national colors of Poland are red and white because red represents love, sacrifice and bravery, while white represents goodness and purity of intentions. And without further ado, let's dissect these games. CD Projekt SE is a Polish video game developer, publisher and distributor based in Warsaw, founded in May of 1994 by Marcin Iwinski and Michał Kicinski. In the beginning, they developed games for other companies, and after failed collaboration, they decided to create their own game. For this, they chose the widely popular Polish fantasy book series called Wiedźmin, which is also known as The Witcher, a book series written by Andrzej Sapkowski. The book series retells some of the darkest parts of Central and Eastern European history, set in a fantasy universe, which was heavily inspired by Slavic folklore and mythology, as well as Polish romantic literature. And according to Polish fans, the reason why this book became so popular in their country is because it incorporates a form of humor and cynicism, which is a big part of their culture, as well as the attitudes the characters show while facing their darkest moments. Now, CD Projekt wasn't the first one to try creating a game adaptation for this story, but all prior attempts have failed. They started developing this game in a 2-room office in 2003, and the development had its ups and downs, partially due to the writing team not seeing eye to eye with their lead developer, which, as a software developer, I can tell you it happens in the industry more than you would expect. They had multiple complications finding the appropriate game engine to develop over, because although nowadays we are blessed to have Unity, Godot, Unreal and Fire Engine, in the early 2000s there weren't that many options, and game devs often had to extend and override the existing engines to suit their needs. For example, one major thing earlier game engines lacked is the transition of ambient lighting as the daytime or weather changes, and given that many of the quests rely on those aspects, it must have been a pain in the ass to add those elements to the game. Other problems appeared while trying to create realistic character movements, the team not seeing eye to eye on the over-sexualization of female characters, which by the way was mainly added to attract a young male Western audience who were considered to be the main target group of the gaming industry at that time. And during that process, the writers needed to rewrite parts of the plot multiple times, which can cause a huge domino effect in such a decision-based game. But after almost 5 years of development and multiple budget increases, the game was finally released in 2007. At first, it was a PC-only game, but throughout the years they switched to other consoles and later even released an enhanced version fixing the rough edges of the original game. The second game was easier to develop since CD Projekt has created their own engine, keeping in mind the needs of the Witcher game's development. The problem, however, was the global financial issues, which directly indirectly affected the game as well, forcing the creators to remove parts of the plot and the locations due to budget cuts. The new game featured countless improvements to core mechanics, gameplay, combat style, visuals, but got some heavy criticism for the overly sexual content. In the early 2010s, two major factors appeared in pop culture. Grimdark fantasy with a Eurocentric setting has gained a lot of attention, partially thanks to HBO's Game of Thrones series, as well as game series like Elder Scrolls and Dark Souls earning a massive amount of success. In literature, Slavic fantasy books began to gain some traction too, which is amusingly thanks to books written by authors who know literally nothing about any of the Slavic countries. And all these factors put the next game onto the path of success from the very beginning. So, with a self-funded budget of $81 million, the world's most popular fantasy RPG was born, incorporating the best elements of the original book series, stuffed with various references to Polish, Balkan, and other forms of Slavic culture, incorporating citations of the tragic history of Central and Eastern Europe, making every character more real and believable, giving every interaction a depth, adding some more genuine romance to the plot, and focusing on portraying Sapkowski's universe in a more faithful manner. The video game series isn't a direct adaptation of Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher series, but it's set in the same universe years after the events of the Witcher books. And interestingly enough, playing the games won't spoil the events of the books for you. At the beginning of the first game, Geralt is found wounded, with his memories stolen by amnesia, which he only recovers over the course of the second game. You see, this was a convenient way of CD Projekt making sure that the players who haven't read the books could still easily get involved. Although the games do not follow the plot, they manage to perfectly capture the universe created by Sapkowski, including the political conflicts, most of the character dynamics, and the overall atmosphere of the story. The main protagonist of the saga, Geralt of Rivia, is very accurately adapted, including his cynicism, sarcastic remarks, arrogance, but also his strong moral compass and his caring side. The games, especially the third one, doubles down on incorporating the cultural and historical references of the books and stuffed the story full of additional references to Polish and other forms of Slavic mythology, Polish romantic literature, and even legal scandals happening in Poland during the development of the game, but more on that later. The games also managed to preserve the book's anti-war narrative, showing the gruesome effect the ongoing political conflicts had all over the northern kingdoms. Thanks to the endless amount of side quests, especially the ones in the third game, they managed to captivate the Monster Slayer for hire feel of the books as well, which is the most visible in the short story collections. One aspect the game adaptations are often criticized for is the over-sexualization of the female characters. It is important to note that although Sapkowski himself has a weird obsession with describing every female character's breasts, even while he's talking about monsters, he himself said in interviews that he is a huge supporter of the feminist movement, and it's clear that in his books he tried to create characters similar to lady bosses you can find all over Central and Eastern European myths, legends, and folktales, or even our historical figures. This is why the over-sexualization of these characters doesn't fit his narrative. But keep in mind that until recent years, gamers were stereotyped as horny teenage boys with no lives, and games were usually trying to cater to that demographic, so this shouldn't come as a surprise. Though let's be real, it could have been way more awesome to have these characters wear some traditional Slavic clothing. A couple of years ago, an artist by the name of Skoladros has created a design for that type of clothing, and I would die to see this in an actual game. For example, this design of Ciri's outfit is based on clothes of Highlanders of Juvier's Space Kids. I think these outfits would have kept the games closer to the book's atmosphere. One of the biggest changes in the games compared to the books is the role of the sorceress Triss Merigold, who is an on and off love interest throughout the series. She went from a side character to a main character, and in the first game she actually replaces parts of Yennefer's role, who is the actual main love interest in the book series. On the upside, they fixed some of her character flaws in the adaptation, such as her insecurity, low level of self-respect, and immature mentality, especially when it comes to chasing after Geralt, which made her character overall more likable. On the downside, however, in the books she suffers a heavy injury during a battle, which leaves a huge scar due to which she cannot wear clothes with plunging necklines, but the games kinda miss that detail for obvious reasons. So overall, aside from the blatant sexualization of certain characters, given that the game's creators managed to captivate Sapkowski's universe, the historical and cultural references, and of course the subtext of the books, I feel like this is quite a faithful adaptation. But why do so many people from Central and Eastern Europe find these games so important? Well, aside from portraying the tragic history of this region in an accurate manner, incorporating elements of this area's mythology and folklore, adapting actual folk songs as soundtracks, and using real places for modeling buildings, there's one very important aspect of these games that you might notice immediately at first sight. Now, I got first introduced to this franchise thanks to the third Witcher game, and what stood out the most to me is the visually accurate representation of Central and Eastern Europe. As you might have noticed, usually in pop culture, this area does not have a great representation. This is mainly credited to the anti-communist propaganda which was pushed by Hollywood and the Western film industry starting from the Cold War era, which was trying to portray the formerly communist countries as cold, poor, and depressing as possible. And so the endlessly memed grey and blue filter was born, which for some reason is still used even today. And these people dare to say that we're the ones behind the times SMH. Well, if you ever set foot in this area or know anything about our cultures, you might have noticed that our architecture, folk art, traditional clothing all show that we are obsessed with colorful things, especially the color red, which is why I cringe every time I see that filter. So I was actually caught by surprise to see something so vivid, colorful, and overall realistic, representing one of the countries of this area in a prominent piece of pop culture. Now, when it comes to the Netflix adaptation,
Życie jest bez sensu i wszyscy zginiemy.
now we can argue that it's a dark fantasy story and that's why it has this color scheme, but keep in mind that Game of Thrones is also a dark fantasy series and it looks like this. If you need visual filters to set the atmosphere of a story, you're just a bad storyteller. Another thing I love about the visuals of this game is the use of real-life places. For example, we can take a look at Novigrad, a city which was modeled after one of the most beautiful places in Poland, Gdańsk. Especially the crane, which is nowadays known as the National Maritime Museum, which is dedicated to gathering, researching and preserving artifacts and documents concerning ship transport, international trade, fishing and culture of people working at sea, rivers and those ashore. The Fike Island Tower, which appears in a quest called Tower Full of Mice, was actually modeled after Misza Wieża, aka the Mice Tower in Kuruszwica. I was very happy to see houses in Welen modeled after Zalipia, the painted village of Poland, but some of the countryside buildings also reminded me of the Małżice open-air museum, especially Lucian's windmill. Oxenfurt looks like a combination of Wrocław and Krakow. Krauspurch looks quite similar to Biskupim, which is an archaeological site and a life-size model of the late Bronze Age fortified settlement in north-central Poland, and also serves as the archaeological open-air museum. Not to mention that Ponta River and Welen's landscape is clearly modeled after the Vistula around Warsaw and Mazovia. Another thing that left a deep impression on me was the background music. Throughout the games you can hear songs such as the Belarusian Staroja, which you might know as the song of the sword dancer. There's also the old Croatian song Naranča. The Bulgarian folk song Lazare, which everyone refers to nowadays as Banana Tiger. And of course, Merchants of Novigrad, which is a cover of the Polish band Percival's Swisha. One of the music directors of the games, Mikołaj Stroiński, has pointed out in an interview that in order to nail the Slavic portion of the soundtrack, they researched folk bands from Poland and expanded their style with Balkan music as well, focusing on the pivotal point between the two styles, which is Bulgaria. I think the creators of the game did a great job of instantly dragging you into this heavily Slavic-inspired universe throughout the audio visuals, which later on is amplified by the mythological, cultural and historical references. Slavic mythology is full of dark tales, terrifying creatures, shady characters, and the games did a great job adapting the ones you could find in the books as well as adding some new ones. The very first mythological reference we can see in the first game is the Striga, a usually female demon somewhat similar to a vampire in Slavic and especially Polish folklore. According to belief, Strigas had two souls, but after their early death, only one of their two souls would pass to the afterlife and the other would cause the deceased Striga to come back to life and prey upon other living beings. beings. People who were believed to have two hearts or two souls, those who had no armpit hair, and even newborns with already developed teeth were usually identified as strigas and chased away from the human dwelling places. Also, during epidemics, people were getting buried alive, and those who managed to get out of their graves, often weak, ill, and with mutilated hands, they were said to be strigas as well. The Kikimora is a legendary female house spirit from Slavic mythology, a mischievous spirit which inhabits a house where she lives behind the stove or in the cellar and usually produces noises similar to those made by mice in order to obtain food. Kikimora was also the first traditional explanation for sleep paralysis in Russian folklore. The botchling was inspired by the Poronyets, a character which can be found both in West and Slavic folklore with different names as a hostile and malicious demon who came into existence from stillborn fetuses but also from improperly buried remains of children who had died during infancy, and it was considered to be an extremely powerful demon due to its potential of unrealized life. The stillborn fetus did not turn into a Poronyets if it was buried under the threshold of the house, and in that case it turned into a Kobuk, aka a protective spirit instead. The new raid was inspired by Poludnica, also known as Lady Midday, who is a character which appears in the mythology of various Slavic countries as a supernatural creature that makes herself evident in the middle of hot summer days, also takes the form of a whirling dust cloud and carries scythe, sickle or shears. She stops people in the field to ask them difficult questions or engage them in conversation, and if anyone fails to answer a question or tries to change the subject, she will cut off their head or strike them with illness. Polutnica also loves to dance, and if she saw a girl lying down to rest in the field, she would wake her up and begin to persuade her to dance with her. Her character was basically the personification of a sunstroke, and it was utilized to keep children away from valuable crops. The crones, also referred to as ladies of the wood, are a reference to the most well-known character from Slavic mythology, Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga is a supernatural being, or in some cases a trio of sisters of the same name, who appear as a deformed or ferocious-looking old woman who lives in a hut usually described as standing on chicken legs. Baba Yaga may help or hinder those that encounter her or seek her out. She may play a maternal role and has associations with forest wildlife, and her depictions vary greatly across tales, ranging from a child-eating monster to helping a protagonist find his missing bride. The drowners are known as Utopiets, who are the Slavic spirits of water. They are spirits of human souls that died drowning, residing in the element of their own demise, and they are responsible for sucking people into swamps and lakes as well as killing animals standing near the still waters. Also, the people who committed suicide by drowning were believed to turn into an Utopiet. Stelashi is a tutelary deity of the forest in pagan Slavic mythology who rules over the forests and hunting. He is considered a protective forest spirit as well as a dangerous beast. As long as the villagers took care to hunt in moderation and avoided cutting trees, the Lashi would live in harmony with them. The Vodyanoi is an evil spirit whose favorite hobby is drowning humans. Anyone bathing after sunset on a holy day or without having first made the sign of the cross risks being sucked into the water by the Vodyanoi. He can assume many different forms that enable him to deceive and trap his victims, and he lives alone in his particular body of water and is known to favor rivers with strong currents and swamps. The ultimate enemy of Witcher 3, Eredin, who is the king of the Wild Hunt, was seemingly inspired by Kashi the Deathless, who is an archetypal male antagonist in Russian folklore. The most common feature of tales involving Kashi is a spell which prevents him from being killed. Also, he hides his soul inside nested objects to protect it, and usually he takes the role of a malevolent rival father figure who competes for or entraps a male hero's love interest. And lastly, Gunter Odim, who appears in the third game as a powerful individual, creating pacts with people in exchange for their souls and being able to control time with a mere clap of his hands, is a reference to Pan Twardowski, a sorcerer from Polish folklore who made a deal with the devil. Pan Twardowski sold his soul in exchange for special powers, such as summoning up the spirit of Polish king Sigismund Augustus's deceased wife, but he usually met a tragic fate. There are probably countless more references to Slavic folklore, but these are the ones I could quickly gather. I have already talked about the historical references of the books last time, such as the ethnic tensions of Central and Eastern Europe, the history of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the pogroms, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and of course the political and historical events happening during the publication years of the book series, such as the anti-communist revolutions of 1989 and the Yugoslav wars. So I'm not gonna get into the details of those again, but the books add some more historical Easter eggs into the story from the weirdest corners of worldwide history. Surprisingly, Surprisingly enough, the Witcher games are filled with references to Polish romantic literature. In Witcher 1, there is a quest called Heat of the Day, which is about a female character named Alina who was killed by her jealous sister. This is actually a reference to Julius Slowacki's famous work Balladina. In the same quest, when Geralt and Dandelion finally confront Lady Midday, Dandelion begins to recite this poem.
His lips sealed, his eyes blank, his breast stone cold, his heart has ceased. Still in this world, yet no longer apart, who is this man?
The deceased.
He is literally reciting verses from Adam Mickiewicz's The Ghost. Mickiewicz's work makes quite a few comebacks throughout the games. For example, in Witcher 2, you can encounter a retelling of Mickiewicz's poem, Colonel's Death, which was written about Countess Emilia Plater, a Polish-Lithuanian noblewoman and a revolutionary. Plater always wanted to go to war her entire life, and when the November uprising broke out against the Russian Empire, she cut her hair, prepared a uniform for herself, then organized and equipped a group of volunteers. She led a unit of roughly 280 infantry, 60 cavalry, and several thousand peasants armed with war scythes. She also participated in several engagements in present-day Lithuania and received the rank of captain in the Polish insurgent forces. In the games, she is personified by a character named Saskia the Dragon Slayer. In the third game, there's also a side quest called Forefather's Eve, which is also the title and story of one of Mickiewicz's famous poetic dramas. But the cultural references don't stop there. For example, in Witcher 1, you will meet Ramsmeat, the leader of Vizima's underworld. This is a reference to Baranina, meaning lamb meat, which was the nickname of an actual Polish mafia boss who was active in the 90s. In the second game, you might have heard this song.
Nie noszą lampasów, lecz leśny ich strój, wiewiórcze kity miast złota. Za wolność i rasę dziś ciągnie na bój, piechota, jorweta, piechota.
Well, this is actually a modified version of a Polish song called Stara Piechota, meaning Grey Infantry, which is a Polish military song written by the Polish legions during World War I. In Witcher 2, there's a scene where Geralt and Dandelion discuss Zoltan's marriage proposal getting rejected when Dandelion says this.
You'll never believe this, Geralt, but they served duck blood soup. It was as black as tar.
You see, before the 19th century, the Polish dog blood soup, chervina, was served to young men applying for the hand of their beloved ones, after the parents rejected their proposal. Now, one funny reference which was pointed out by Polish fans comes in the form of a character named Vilmos Bartok, an incest merchant who sells suspicious substances. This is a reference to a Polish man named David Bratko, who was legally selling hallucinogenic drugs under the pretense of them being collector's items, with the full sanction of the law. I'm pretty sure Polish viewers and those who are overall more well-versed in the topic of Slavic cultures could point out way more of these references. Given how atrocious and straight-up insulting the representation of Central and Eastern European countries is, even in today's pop culture, finally seeing a video game series that represents this area in a positive light really warms my heart. Walking through the fields of Velin, getting involved with random village drama, and strolling through the streets of Novigrad was the first time I felt like I was at home in a video game series. I think Iwinski and Kicinski made the best decision of their lives when they chose Andrzej Sapkowski's The Witcher, a series which already had a high cultural importance in my opinion. I'm really happy that these adaptation landed in the hands of someone who actually understood the subtext of the books and managed to captivate the atmosphere perfectly. And I hope that in the future we will see some more games representing the cultures of any of these countries in a respectful manner. But enough about my opinions. Have you played these games? Or are you planning to give them a try? Tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. I usually make content about the gaming and literature related topics of this area, so if you're into that, please consider subscribing. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.
Golek miasta Jezusowi